Very much. I have just one amendment, and it deals with rural post offices.
Or reject.
The reality, I suppose, is that there are some post offices that have outlived their usefulness, their viability. But the reality is that others have not. And I have yet to see the criteria by which the Postal Service reaches a conclusion as to which ones remain viable and which ones do not. The Postal Service earlier this year announced the potential closing of 3,700 post offices. 134 of them, for example, are in the state of Kansas, so it's a significant number, but it's not probably inordinate compared to many other members of the Senate. We've attended, staff of mine have attended 90 of those closing meetings. I can't think of an instance in which any member of the community goes to the community meeting and comes away believing that the Postal Service has a plan in place for why their post office was chosen, or that there's anything that a member of the community can do about it. And so it seems to me we have the Postal Service going through the motions of conducting these community meetings, explaining that their post office is on the list for whatever reasons that individual who's representing the Postal Service explains. And when folks suggest, what do we do to see that our post office isn't closed, almost without exception, there is no answer other than to call your congressman and your senator. The amendment that I propose, and I would indicate that it is co-sponsored by Senators Tester, Collins, Pryor, Beggish, McCaskill, and I understand Landrieu. It creates a set of criteria that the Postal Service must use in conjunction with the Postal Rate Commission, and it sets out the criteria that the Postal Service should consider for, in a sense, kind of the basic services. And perhaps it goes to the question I was raising earlier: is there not some standard by which we would expect the Post Office to provide service to Americans across the country? Perhaps number of days, but in this case, communities, rural versus urban, suburban. What standard would we expect to have some minimal or basic level of service? And so this requires the Postal Service to develop those national standards and to take into account really four things: geography, the proximity of a postal service to customers, and the maximum time that it takes for a customer, what maximum amount of time a customer should be expected to travel; population factors, density, age, demographics; requirements to serve rural areas such as Alaska or Hawaii that may have unique in regard to transportation; and to make certain that the Postal Service looks at available retail services in the area that were served by the Post Office. Again, kind of the nature of the community. Many people, many constituents of mine will attend one of these meetings and come away wondering, why was our town chosen and not the town down the road? And so this sets a criteria for which we have some level of ability to determine why us and not somebody else. But more importantly, it creates the opportunity for the community then to appeal that decision based upon the criteria to the Postal Rate Commission. In addition to that, this amendment requires the Postal Service to look at other options, such as shortening the length of hours for the local post office. For example, having a postmaster there for fewer hours during the workday. Again, for that community or village post office, that concept that's out there of co-locating with a local school or restaurant or grocery store in order, again, to save costs. And finally, this amendment, that's the nature of the amendment, and I would just indicate that the effective date of this amendment is upon enactment, and the language of the legislation, the language of the amendment, and therefore the language of the legislation if my amendment is adopted, would say it applies to the post offices currently under consideration. They would become subject to the criteria that we have now created. And so, in my view, it's a pretty straightforward, create a transparent process, determine what levels of of service are to be expected, what's the criteria for determining whether a community post office meets, a post office in a community meets those standards, give the community the chance to indicate that they disagree with the conclusion, and have the Postal Rate Commission, a more independent agency, body, determine whether or not the Postal Service has followed that procedure.
Thanks, Senator Moran. Thanks for all your work on this amendment with the bipartisan group of colleagues. Senator Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.